Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about an issue that isn't spoken about as much as it needs to be. We're talking about the international kidnapping of children by their own parent in Japan. Imagine a divorce, the dividing of assets, lawyers, every other headache possible. With children involved, it gets even more convoluted. But imagine if you never had the chance to ever see your children again. Or worst case scenario, you never even got to say goodbye, no matter how much you begged the police to have your former spouse allow you to see them. This problem is one that is woven into Japan's legal system, an unforgiving one where legal authorities claim that divorce is a sensitive family matter and they don't want to get involved. That attitude then extends to the courts, where one parent is ruled in favor so unanimously that there is no chance to even try to be reconsidered. No use arguing, it's over. It's as if your children have been kidnapped by your ex-spouse. And they have. In 2014, the Hague Convention looked Japan dead in the eye and called out the country known as the black hole of child abductions. And despite signing an agreement during that time, Japan's reputation regarding this grim situation hasn't exactly changed over the years. To this day, the country has been accused viciously of having double standards when it comes to resolving its own child abduction problems. As we reach a decade since the signing of the treaty, what has happened in Japan during that time? Has anything gotten better? Does Japan still deserve such a stinging reputation? Back in 1980, the Hague Convention on the Civil Rights of International Child Abduction was developed. It is an international treaty that demands for the return of the children who have been wrongfully removed from their country of residence to another country. Such an abduction is in clear violation of their custodial rights. However, in order for the terms of the treaty to apply, both countries must have signed and agreed, and even then it doesn't always work, especially not regarding Japan. On April 1st, 2014, Japan agreed to the terms of the Hague Convention, a move that was considered long overdue by many. In fact, it was the final G7 country to even do so, and not without a lot of pressure from other nations. Despite signing, there are still major issues with the implementation and enforcement of the treaty within Japanese borders. One of the main challenges is that Japanese courts have the final say in custody decisions, such as determining which parent gets custody, as dual custody is not yet recognized in Japan. That means that when a couple divorces, only one parent is granted full custodial rights. Once a child has been registered under the parent with sole custody, the other parent may never see their children ever again, much less have a say in their education or healthcare. Although the Hague Convention Treaty was signed a staggering 10 years ago, domestic Japanese law remain unchanged and don't reflect the terms stated within. Initial attempts to even file a police report when one parent abducts a child often results in the police stating that it is a private matter between a broken couple. This can be infuriating at the very least and traumatizing at worst. Whenever a divorce is issued in Japan, usually whoever the child is living with at the time is the one awarded sole custody, unless another parent can prove that they are able to better provide for the children. This is why so many lawyers have told distressed parents that whoever takes the children first wins as far as custody is concerned. Such an approach is honestly concerning, as it's not thoroughly comprehensive as it ought to be regarding a child's welfare. Why do courts think this way? And why do judges rule like this? Children are considered to essentially be property of the households they live in, instead of individuals with rights to see a parent. In short, the left behind parent, thanks to the divorce, has no right to interfere in a household they don't live in. If dual custody was recognized within Japan, courts would arguably finally have to consider children to be individuals who have an inherent right to a relationship with both parents. And the concept of providing for a child in custody battles wouldn't be solely based on who took the kids to their new home first. Why is Japan so slow to recognize dual custody? Part of the problem is due to the Koseki system, which is a civil registration database that records details such as births, deaths, marriages, and family ties. It was introduced towards the end of the Edo period and currently assigns a single household name to each children, usually the father unless the mother is unmarried at the time. This means that a child can only be registered as belonging to one parental household and cannot be listed in two different family registers should a divorce happen. There are also cultural issues that make it difficult to get help. Within Japanese society, parents who are separated from their children due to divorce are often subjected to unjustified prejudice and shame, so many people feel that they cannot reveal their circumstances at work or in their local communities. It makes it that much harder to talk about the unfairness of being cut off from their children and shed light to the situation. They are then forced to bear the pain in silence, unable to either seek support or challenge the prejudice within Japanese society surrounding divorce and parental separation. This doesn't mean that it's impossible for a separated parent to see their child, however. Within Japanese civil code, the right to visitation is recognized. It's just that the police are, again, not exactly keen on enforcing something that is considered a private matter. If a separated parent wants to see their child, it's almost impossible to have the courts force the parent who has sole custody to comply regardless of any rights recognized. This was highlighted especially during the height of the pandemic in 2020, when separated parents who had an agreement with their ex-spouse to see their children suddenly found themselves completely cut off. One father filed a petition to see his daughter, but the judge declared that the situation wasn't urgent and dismissed the case. Of course, online visitation was and continues to be a thing, but just because the option is available doesn't mean it happened, nor that the courts would be ready to back the separated parent. Again, once a parent has obtained sole custody within Japan, the matter is considered settled, and that parent can decide everything on their own. Despite all of this, the Japanese government doesn't seem too keen on changing this anytime soon. This past summer, in June 2023, the Tokyo District Court dismissed a lawsuit challenging whether or not allowing only one parent to have custody was unconstitutional. The reason? The sole custody system is more efficient as it avoids arguments between the estranged parents, and said arguments could either harm or interrupt whatever is in the best interests of the child. However, this ruling doesn't seem to reflect the beliefs of most ordinary Japanese people. A nationwide poll found that 50% of those surveyed believed that both parents should be involved in the process of raising children to varying degrees, and only 5.7% said that it was undesirable regardless. Most of the survey respondents were focused on specific cases with certain conditions being met, such as the lack of domestic violence. They further cited that joint rearing should focus on healthcare treatments in serious cases, as well as education and career paths. Of those surveyed, 9.3% were not even aware of the sole custody system that Japan currently has in place, so it's definitely not a law that every Japanese person even knows about. Regarding the koseki, only Japanese nationals are formally recorded in registries, though foreigners are obligated to report things such as births, deaths, etc., even if they aren't registered in the koseki themselves. If a foreigner marries a Japanese national and has a child, the child will be registered on the Japanese spouse's koseki. You can probably already imagine the kinds of difficulties a foreign parent would have in terms of having legal rights and custody of the child should there be a divorce. This lack of recognition for dual custody has led to far too many cases of international parent-child abductions, where one parent takes the child to Japan without the consent or knowledge of the other parent, or even blatantly defying court orders. The Hague Convention Treaty aims to address this issue by establishing a framework for the prompt return of the abducted children, but it can't be effective when the Japanese legal system and courts don't exactly enforce court orders issued from outside of Japan. This means that even if a child has been wrongfully kept in Japan in violation of the custody decision of the other country, the Japanese court can still rule in favor of the Japanese parent or simply outright ignore the foreign court's verdict. Imagine that one day you woke up, had breakfast like always in your home, left for work and came back only to find that not only was everything completely gone, but so were your children and your spouse. This is the reality of Vincent Fichot, a French father who protested during the 2020 Tokyo Olympics with a hunger strike to call attention to this issue. When he called his lawyer with the horrific details of what he'd come home to, the lawyer calmly informed him that his children had been kidnapped. Almost the same thing happened to Australian mother Catherine Henderson in 2019, who received a phone call from her lawyer while on her way home from work. What happened? Her lawyer received a fax from her husband's lawyer declaring that he'd taken the children and suddenly moved out. When she came home, her apartment was cleaned out of everything except for a few rugs on the floor. She hasn't seen her children since. Such a devastating situation has become common enough that even the Australian Embassy to Japan has a note warning about parental abduction. They even warned that they have absolutely no power or authority to force visitation or grant access to decisions regarding the child's welfare. Given that the Japanese government has failed time and time again to return kidnapped children who have been taken to Japan without the other parent's consent, nor has the legal system altered any of its laws to abide with the Hague Convention treaty they signed 10 years ago, far too many devastated parents, both within and outside of Japan, Japanese nationals and foreigners, are facing a grim reality where they are helpless and stranded without any means to see their children again. There are multiple organizations from within that hope to address the problem amongst Japanese nationals facing this complex issue. One of them is the Grassroots Action for Joint Custody and Shared Parenting in Japan, and it was formed by parents who have been separated from the children. Due to the social stigmas of being a left-behind parent, their members are anonymous. Others, like Yosuke Sumi, the head of the NGO Children's Ombudsman Japan, have identified themselves and are quite active on social media such as Twitter, X, on the issue. Regarding international cases, Kizuna Child Parent Reunion has been active for many years advocating for children to have and enjoy relationships with both parents. Savons Nos Enfants de Pont maintains an active social media presence primarily in French. Finally, the NGO Bring Abducted Children Home has been working tirelessly since 2011 on the issue, with the founder, Jeffrey Morehouse, having spoken to the UN Human Rights Committee in 2022. The delegation from Japan was inadequate with their answers, which surprises pretty much nobody at this point. As it is sadly the norm here in Japan, progress is moving slowly. 3 years ago, in 2021, a subcommittee in the Ministry of Justice began to reconsider its position regarding how divorce is handled in Japan and how it affects the well-being of children. In response, the Australian government issued an official plea to the Japanese government, asking them to reform the laws. However, at this time, despite any statements regarding reconsideration, still no significant changes have been made. Let's be real, the lack of progress on the Japanese government's end is concerning, as it reflects a continued disregard for the rights and welfare of children affected by divorce-related kidnappings in Japan. It is vital for the Japanese government to finally abide by the Hague Convention treaty, as well as consider the pain of its own citizens and take concrete actions. These reforms are way past overdue, and it's high time the Japanese government saw children not as property of the households, but as individual human beings with the right of having both parents in their lives whenever able and safe. Hello, Editing Sachiko here. As I was working on the video, there have been some updates. In January 2024, the Family Law Subcommittee submitted a proposal to amend the Civil Code as it stands today. It would include the choice between joint and sole custody. If there's no agreement amongst the divorced couple, the family court would then decide in the child's best interests, which sounds like a great move compared to what we currently have in Japan. However, several advocacy groups for victims of domestic violence are very concerned, as in many cases, divorce is the only thing protecting abused spouses and children from their abuser. And so far, there is no guarantee for the victim's safety should their ex file for custody. Should this stop the progression of joint custody in Japan? It's a tricky question. I personally believe that joint custody is crucial, but the protection of victims of domestic violence is also paramount. So any steps forward must be done with the most vulnerable in mind. I'm linking down below the article from Unseen Japan with a lot more information, as well as the link with all of my sources. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and to subscribe. This is a small channel, but as always, I try to be as informative as possible.